All right, so on the interior here, these are the little rudder pedals, and they're kind of neatly done. I think they're a little large in the scale, but they look pretty cool. So I cut them out carefully, and then here I'm using the back of a knife in order to get a fold on pieces that are going to end up tucking under and gluing to give it the right shape. That part, like the half moon piece I'm working on right now, I flip that up. That's for the guy's heel, and the other part is for the toes, just to orient you in the way they really looked, apparently. But I get this up here, and you can see that I kind of take a piece of metal and I piano wire and roll it so I can get a little curve going in there. And then I can glue these tabs. And these just take a little bit of glue, you don't have to go crazy. And then get them sort of tucked underneath the rudder pedal little seat there, the floor of it, the bottom of it, and then you just squeeze them shut. And then you'll end up with a shaped rudder pedal that looks pretty good, especially because it's going to be down there in the cockpit and relatively hidden. You'll see it, but it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. So there I'm putting on the other one. Same deal, a little glue, roll it around and stick it and squeeze it so that it goes underneath and attaches, and then you've got the heel figured out. And so I very carefully kind of tuck that under, and that will give you that round edge part kind of automatically almost. It's still important to round it, I think, with the piano wire. Now the sides, are those pieces, those ears sticking out, those are going to be for a little foot keeper, a little piece of, I guess it would have been, I don't know if it's metal, I think it's probably some kind of leather or something. They'll go around the boot to hold the boots in. And that piece is going to go on later here. I don't know if it would have been metal or not. The painting here, the way it's done in the little model, looks like it would have been metal, but I'm not really sure about Luftwaffe rudder pedals. So I roll it over to give it a shape that would go over a boot, and then you just put a little glue on each side and tuck it in there and squeeze it. So there's a little bit of glue there, and then you slide this piece on. I probably could have, I didn't know where to place it. I probably could have placed it flush with the bottom rather than at the kind of at the tip, because my rudder pedals, that strap looks pretty tall when I'm all done, but when I ultimately put it under the instrument panel, it was kind of hard to fit. But anyway, there they are, done, and they're ready to put in the interior. They add a lot actually to the interior, make it look a little more interesting, and they're passable. They don't look bad. They're like photo etch parts. Now off camera, I did lots of gussying up here. Made my own seat in there, and you can see there's the gunner's seat, and I put all these little bits and pieces in there. Most of it's plastic, and it's some paper, and it's just to make things look more interesting and to give them three-dimensionality. There's the radios in there, and probably that's part of the articulation and the mechanism, the machinery, the electrics for the rear gunner is my guess. But this is really almost done. You can see I put the joystick in there, and you can see the instruments have little circles of paper cut out of them for them. I'm going to end up putting, once this is all painted, I'm going to end up sourcing some instrument faces, putting them in there, and then putting a little drop of clear coat over them to make it look like glass. I'm going to try that as an experiment. We'll see. But that's just basically, I had a few more things for it to be done, but that's the basic interior, and it looks pretty convincing. So now I started, because I wanted to try something else, I wanted to try to make these barbettes work. And you can see there's a barrel there, and you can see there it is on the edge to see where things go. These pieces here are going to be the outside portions, like the teardrop portion that you see that houses around the gun right there. Those pieces go there on those faces. Those are where the gun's going to fit. So the gun's going to fit between those two little formers. And you can see there's a tiny arrow there. So I matched that up with the tiny arrow going that way. That's facing forward. So the fatter part of the teardrop is forward, which makes sense when you think about what's going to happen. But these will be glued into those slot areas, just like so. these are the guns. And I thought these would be a real bear to put together, but they turned out they were easy. And then these are the parts for the barrel itself that'll make it go around. There are the end places that are made with my balsa. And then there's a tab that I cut off and added. I'm going to glue that on first and add it to the end, such as like making a fuselage skin. And you're just going to roll it around into a tube, and that's going to be that piece right there. So it's all pretty self-explanatory. And then that is where I'm going to put a piece of wire, and Mike gets a piece of brass. They show a pin, I think, a cut-off pin. I'll put a piece of brass in there, and we'll see if we can make this articulate. So first comes first here. We'll take this thing, and we'll roll it. I've just glued in that tab, and then we do the same old thing we always do, which is roll this thing over and on your hand or on something else, on a eraser, on a mouse pad, anything that gives you a little bit of cushion, roll that around and you end up making your cylinder. I tend to take these and get them close, and then I roll them together, kind of over roll them like this, and then that helps them hold together too. Again, the idea is to make the form basically ready for glue, so you don't even need glue on it hardly. I've seen some guys on YouTube where they will fold these, and when they pull them apart to actually add the glue, it's like, why even add the glue? They're absolutely perfect when they're done. Mine aren't quite that way, but I'm just not patient enough. But the point is, make the glue do its thing. That's an old X-Acto blade that's all dull, so I'm just kind of using that as a glue applicator in this case. And you just do like you do on all the fuselage formers, which is add the strip on there, and then a little glue, and now you roll this over and grab it, tighten it in place. I usually use my fingers at first, and then I'll go in and play around with maybe tweezers to make sure it's nice and solid. This piece is good because it's just big enough you can get your big fat fingers in there, which is handy. Now, in here go these pieces, but notice it's too big. There's a lot of room in there, so I do that trick where you put down essentially a bulkhead, and you can see there's so much room in there. So what I needed to do was cut the cylinder apart, and then cut it down a little bit, and then make a new tab and put it in again. So there I'm just cutting off incrementally little bits until I get it to the right shape. So what I'll do is I'll cut these off. I had to cut off a couple of them actually. This is all condensed. But I just keep attempting to make sure that I can bring it around and make a nice cylinder that those little bulkheads will fit. Ultimately, that happens. Here I've got it together, and I've tested it, and I think that's about the right size. Now when I put in my little end plate, it actually goes down with a little bit of help and gets stuck in the end. And when you turn it over, it's flush and it's solid and it's actually fits. So that's just what you got to do with lots of things. That's fine. So I pushed it back in a little ways because it fits so nice, and then just put glue around the edge. And then I'll take that and once I put the glue around the edge, just take and push them forward, push the little end plate forward, and it'll glue it right in. So there I am, it's ready to go. I got glue in there. Just tap that down, ready to go. And glue it to the surface of the board. Make sure it's flush, because this is where the rest of the gun is going to go. So you have the mount, so you got to make sure it's good. And let it dry. And because I thought this needed to be kind of strong, I decided to put a little super glue in there and smear it around the inside. So I'm just putting in drops of super glue, the thick super glue, and just kind of smearing them in there with a piece of brass or a toothpick or whatever you got, so that the edges will be nice and solid, because this does have to be a pretty good piece, because unlike most adult modelers, I like to play with my models, so I want to be able to actually use these guns on there and be kind of fun to roll them around. So add a little zip kicker, and now I've got a nice solid cylinder, and then test fit the other piece, and then just start putting that in. So a little bit of glue around the outside edge all the way around, and then I can put that little guy in and kind of have him a little a little proud of the end. So I kind of put him in, and I make sure he's a little bit proud. I put him a little too far, so I pull him out a bit. Get him about right, and then kind of do the same thing. Turn it over and push it down gently, and that's going to make it nice and smooth and nice and flush. Make sure it's good and clean, and squeeze it a little bit, and you've got your cylinder. Once it's dry, that's the main drum, the main initial part of your gun. So there it is. Not bad at all. So that was easy. Now this little guy, I put the formers on, and what I've done is drilled through where the holes are, which they have on the model, and I'm test fitting and sort of driving my piece of brass pin through to make sure it'll fit and it's straight, because you don't want the guns to bind. They have to move relatively freely, and make sure things are straight. And then here are the barrels themselves, and I thought this was going to be a pain because it's hard to roll these things. In my opinion, it's hard to get them to fit nice. So initially I got them rolled around my beat up old handle there, brush handle, and using the good old fashioned Mark I palm of the hand. And I rolled it around a piece of piano wire, put a little glue on the end here where it's going to start connecting. I actually pre-rolled this a little bit. You can see it's folded up a bit, but put a little glue on there, and now you sort of grab it and roll it, and the trick is to keep it tight. You don't want it to sort of roll on itself and slide, and you want to keep it nice and even. You don't want it to start rolling diagonally. So once it gets started, right there it got started. I kind of rolled it and squeezed it, and it grabbed to the next roll of paper. And once that happens, then what you do is you just incrementally keep adding glue, and then you keep making sure as you roll, you keep the side flush with itself. And you don't let it roll diagonal, because you can see one end's going to be barrels with a little extra piece on it, and the other end is just the butt end of the gun, but of the cannon. But you just add some glue, and a little goes a long way because it gets squooshed out as you roll. So too much, it'll slide around a lot, and then things won't get a good bond. So or it'll just be harder to make work. So a little bit goes a long way in this case. So you just keep rolling this thing around your wire, and you just keep doing that. And this is just sped up because it's just more of the same. Rolling it, rolling it, rolling it. And then as I'm doing this, notice I'm trying to keep that piece, again, nice in line with the edge. So I did one piece at a time, this part, and then I did the tip of the barrel next. But I got that on there, and now I'm very carefully just rolling this and kind of squeezing it as I go, and keeping my eye on that edge, making sure that sucker stays nice and flush as best as you can. And when they're done, they're a little off, but they're not bad at all. Roll that around, and there is that end pretty much done. Here I need a little more. Didn't quite get to the very edge apparently, but that will hold that in place. And there you go. That looks just fine. So you then work on the barrel, and see that barrel piece is an extra little ribbon that folds around, rolls around, and when you do this with your model, you'll see there's a little black lines in there where it's supposed to follow. And so I put glue on it, and very carefully let it go, and then as I'm putting this on, I'm just again making sure I keep it level and making sure I keep things straight, because you don't want to roll it like a candy cane or a barbershop bar. You want it to be all around perpendicular and straight, so that you have a nice little edge on this barrel. But there it is. Looks fine. You pull out the wire, and you then have your barrel all ready to go, or your whole little gun all ready to go. Pull it off. Bam. There it is. And that is going to then fit in between those two little half moon shaped things, and we will skewer that with a piece of brass, and that will pin it in place and allow it to articulate, supposedly. Spoiler alert, it does work. So here I'm just testing it to make sure what will happen, and it's really neat. It fits nicely in there. Again, the measurements are all pretty dang close. The other side I need to do a little bit of shaving. Made sure that my seam was inside, so that it's on the inside of the fuselage, so you won't see it as well. This will all be painted, but there is a step in there. but it'll move up and down like that, and then ultimately, when it's on the barrel, it will twist and turn. And you just put that on like so. Ultimately, when it's time, you do one end, stick it in, and then you have to put the other side on once it's in, because it's the only way you can hold the whole piece into the side of the fuselage. So that little piece there, those little pieces, those are the piece of brass that go through the whole piece. That gives me a sort of a location mark for all these extra little bits, because you want them to be in line. If they're not in line, you're going to be in trouble. So put a little tacky glue on there, smooth it out a little bit, give it a little bit, because I put too much on in that case. And then I go ahead and put this little guy on. Now these aren't handed, but the barbettes themselves are left and right. So you just make sure which one is left, which one's right. P is right, L is left in the Polish writing. So I just make sure that thing is nice and tight, because that's what's going to hold the whole thing in onto the fuselage, because those are too big to go through the hole, and they will keep that cylinder nicely aligned. When you put this in one side and then put the other cap on the other side, that'll hold it in place. So just making sure that's nice and solid, and then the only thing left is to put the little barbette on there, and you can see the white is showing you where it's supposed to go. And that little piece of brass sticking out gives me a little tooth to grab it onto. And the whole problem here wasn't where do you actually put it, because do you put it so that left part is a little past the circle, or do you put it so it's flush? So I wasn't sure what to do ultimately, but I took a little drill and I drilled. They have little holes where these are supposed to go, and I didn't use those holes because when I rolled mine, it wasn't exactly in the correct orientation. So I just made sure I made some that were gonna fit with my where my seam was on my barrels. Remember, I wanted those down against the fuselage. So as long as you do that, you're good to go. So I'm just making sure everything has a nice drilled hole through it, and I check and make sure that my little piece of brass will fit through all those holes. I cut that off. I take a little piece of brass, and I have cut it off to about the right size, and then I take an end that's going to be on the vertical side, on the top of that piece. This one's, I think, the left barbette, and I just fold this over at a right angle, making sure it's going to fit. I just take this and turn it over, and now this is a little bit of a struggle, but ultimately this goes in. You got to line it up as best you can, and you will find the hole. It might take a little bit of time, but you'll find it, and it will slide through and key into the opposite little half moon piece of balsa, and then you'll have skewered your gun. And then you've got that little right angle there that I just glue in place with super glue, and there's the other end protruding. That gives me my movement. So here I just kind of making sure it's in there, making sure that right angle is solid, and then I just put in some super glue and zip kick it, and that way it's locked in place. And as long as you're doing it there, you're not going to mess up the mechanism at all. So that's just perfect. There's nothing wrong with that. So I zap this, and then it is ready to go. And one end glued is all you need. You don't need to have, keepers on both ends, because as long as one end is glued, it's not going to move anywhere. And there it is, ready to go. Pretty cool. I like it. I didn't know how these were going to work, but they seem to work great. So they can end up going right on there once I put that plate on. That's neat. This goes on here, and then that whole piece will go through the fuselage at that hole that we have to cut. And here's where I'm wondering where it fits. Does it fit flush? Does the little part fit flush like that, or does it go a little bit farther forward? And notice the angle of the teardrop, and see the little arrow. The arrow is pacing forward towards the nose of the airplane. So that's pretty exciting. Now I got to cut that out. And that, by the way, fits perfectly. That is the diameter of the little barrel in there. Now, does it go that way, or does it go flush? And so what I did was I found one of my Osprey books, and there's a picture of it, and it looks a little forward of that circular piece. And so I went ahead and moved mine a little forward just by eye, not crazy forward, but not flush either. I think that was a picture actually of an Me-210. I don't know if they were different on the 410, but that's what I'm going to do, and I'll pretend nobody notices. So add my super glue, because this has to be, again, strong, because, again, I'm a child and I will be playing with this as I run around the living room making airplane noises, attacking bomber boxes of B-17s and B-24s. So I slide that on. It kind of hooks onto that piece of brass, gives it a little bit of purchase, and then it goes flat, and then you just make sure it is flat on there and glues in place. Pretty easy. And there it is, just kind of making sure it's in there. And then again, the whole thing is going to rotate, and then I still have the ability to move my guns outward from the center of the fuselage when necessary. Here I'm just making sure that it's definitely pushing onto the glue, and that you don't want it to be, sitting proud, too proud. And there's that piece. So there's one barrel, one side of it done. So it's got to fit in like that, but all the way through. So what you got to do is cut this thing out. There's a kind of knitting my wife does where she makes this beautiful sweater, and then she cuts it in half and then finishes off and adds buttons, and it always scares me to death to watch her do this. That's kind of how I feel with this, although this is not nearly as important. So you cut into this, use a real sharp new blade, and just go around that edge. I went on the inside of it just to make sure that it was the right size. I don't want to make it so that it's too big. But you just go ahead and cut this thing off. Now in my case, because I made this, remember, with balsa formers, I got some bits of balsa in there that are kind of thick, and you can see they're a problem. Not a big problem, but what I have to do is just go in there with my X-Acto blade and trim them back. Not hard to do. You just careful you don't destroy the whole fuselage and don't rip out the former. But they were there to help hold the former in place. And once I do that, I've got a nice tube, a nice opening to put my piece through. So we're good. That's not a problem. That'll fit right in there, and it fits like a glove. Fits really smooth, really nice. Looks good. So then I was dying to put it in, but I remembered, oh yeah, you got to cut out the other side. And now I'm kind of worried, because does this really match the other side? Because remember, this is hand-drawn and I put it together. So is it really going to work? But I just figured it was, because everything else has worked, so I went ahead and cut this out just where it shows me, rather than being careful. And as it turned out, that was an okay idea. This worked just great. Had a little more problem getting it off of a former that's under here, because there's a big chunk of super glue, I think, that was dried under there. But it came out ultimately. And then I just trimmed that back, cut into the fuselage a tiny bit when I did this, but that was my own fault. That's what happens when you have a sharp blade and you start cutting through things. Yeah, there I made a cut, but it won't matter. It'll be fine. It will be just fine once it's all done. So I'm just now trimming this back, making sure that my little barrel can fit in there and isn't impeded in any way. And you slide it in place from the one side, and then you look, and there it is on the other side. That's the first time I tested it. I'll be dang, it fits. Now the fuselage, it's not quite long enough, and that's just, I'm not surprised. That's okay. So what I did before I put the other side on was I added a piece of 1/16 balsa on that other side of the barrel just to extend it a little bit, so that when I put this in like this, it was actually it actually went to the flush with the outside, and that's how I then, from this point, put on the other panel, the other side with the other gun, and then made sure they were straight, and Bob's your uncle. So here it is, done. So it's neat. I think it's cool. Again, the little covers have to go on them, but when you move one, they both move. And then they both are able to articulate out to attack something that's coming in from the beam, at least a little bit. I think they were utterly useless in real life, but for my model, they look nice. So I'm super pleased how they turned out. They were something was kind of a bugaboo, and worked, and they were a nice diversion from the cockpit. So we'll keep moving.